Airline blocks twin black girls they call Dad, the CEO, and flight stop cold. The early morning bustle of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport pulsed like a living organism, suitcases rolling across the marble floors, baristas shouting names over steam, families rushing, couples arguing, solo travelers with heads buried in their phones. Among the crowd at Gate B12, two teenage girls stood neatly to one side, nearly indistinguishable in their matching burgundy carry-ons, sleek braids, and confident postures. 17-year-old twins Kennedy and Kiana Brooks had done this dozens of times, flown solo, checked into hotels, coordinated pickups and drop-offs. It came with being the daughters of a man who rarely stayed in one place for more than a few weeks. But today wasn't just another trip. This was the first time visiting their father since the divorce had gone final. Since the house in Atlanta had become 2 apartments, 2 holiday schedules, and 2 separate homes. Kennedy adjusted the strap on her shoulder and glanced at the digital board. Flight 2278 to San Francisco. On time, she murmured, a little too tightly. Kiana noticed the tension in her sister's voice. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Kennedy replied quickly, brushing off the question. But the way her fingers tapped the handle of her carry-on betrayed her. Kiana, the more perceptive of the two, didn't press. Instead, she offered a soft, grounding smile. "We're gonna be fine." "Dad promised he cleared his whole weekend for us." Kennedy nodded, trying to focus on that. The last time they'd seen him was over a choppy FaceTime call. He was in a hotel somewhere in Geneva, distracted, as always. But he'd sworn this visit would be different. No business meetings, no quick handoffs with an assistant. Just them. Their father, Christopher Brooks, was the founder and CEO of CoreSight Systems, a multi-billion-dollar tech firm specializing in AI-powered surveillance and security. Most people only knew him as the sharp-suited black visionary who'd graced the cover of Forbes twice before his 50th birthday. But to Kennedy and Kiana, he was just Dad. Complicated, distant, brilliant, and at times, disappointingly human. At the gate, the boarding announcement began. Now, boarding Group 1. Kennedy and Kiana, tickets in hand, approached the counter together. The gate agent, a white woman with cropped blonde hair and a Meridian Airlines blazer, greeted the passenger in front of them with a practiced smile and cheerful tone. "Have a great flight, Mr. Carver." Then she looked at the twins. And something shifted. The smile faltered. Her eyes scanned them quickly, calculating, then narrowed. "I'm sorry, I need to check something," she said flatly, holding out a hand for their boarding passes. The warmth from just a second earlier was gone. Kennedy blinked. "Excuse me? There seems to be an issue with your reservation," the agent said without looking up from her screen. "Can I see your IDs, please?" Kiana furrowed her brows. "We already scanned them when we checked our bags." "I understand, but I'll need to verify your identification again." People in line began glancing over, catching the subtle shift in energy. The twins pulled out their brand-new Georgia state licenses and handed them over. The agent scrutinized the cards longer than necessary, squinting, flipping them back and forth like she expected to find invisible ink. Behind them, a woman in a navy pantsuit stepped forward. "Problem?" she asked the agent, holding up her own boarding pass. "No problem at all, Ms. Lane," the agent said brightly, instantly resuming her prior tone. "Go right ahead." Kennedy watched the woman breeze past, then turned back to the agent. "Are we going to be allowed to board or not?" "I need to run this by my supervisor," the agent said, then leaned to the intercom. "Security to Gate B12. A security officer appeared within a minute, a stocky white man with a badge and a sour expression. He listened to the agent whisper something, nodded, and then turned to the girls. "Step aside, please." "What for?" Kennedy asked, her voice rising. We're conducting a secondary verification. For what reason? Kiana cut in. Standard protocol, Kennedy scoffed. Then why isn't everyone else going through standard protocol? The officer's lips twitched. Ma'am, step aside. Kennedy's jaw clenched. She glanced around. Eyes were definitely on them now, some curious, some sympathetic, most indifferent. Kiana leaned in and whispered, "Call Dad." Kennedy didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone and tapped the contact labeled simply, Dad, 3 rings. Then, his voice. Calm, controlled. Kennedy? What's wrong? Dad, they're not letting us board. We're at the gate. Everything's in order. We gave them our IDs. They just won't let us through. They won't tell us why. A pause, then a cold edge slipped into his voice. Put me on with the gate supervisor. Now. Kennedy looked up at the agent who was clearly listening in. My father would like to speak with your supervisor. The agent's face flickered, just for a second. That won't be necessary. Let me just check something real quick. But it was too late. Kennedy handed her phone to the security officer. He's waiting. The officer took the phone, reluctant. This is Officer Reed's, DFW Airport. Christopher's voice came through the speaker, clear enough for everyone to hear. This is Christopher Brooks, CEO of CoreSight Systems. You're detaining my daughters without cause. I expect an immediate explanation or an apology. And you have 30 seconds to decide which. The officer stiffened. The gate agent paled. Suddenly, the keyboard began clacking furiously. Actually, it looks like the system just refreshed, the agent said quickly. Everything's fine. Must have been a glitch. No, it wasn't, Kennedy said, her tone sharp. You saw our names. You made assumptions. Now you're scared because you Googled who our dad is. The agent avoided eye contact. You're all set to board. As they stepped past, Kiana looked over her shoulder. You didn't think we'd have someone powerful to call, did you? The gate agent didn't respond. Once seated in first class, courtesy of their father's status, they barely spoke. Kiana opened her sketchbook and began shading furiously. Kennedy stared out the window, her fists clenched. What just happened? She muttered. Kiana exhaled. What's always been happening, just not to people who can do something about it. 10 minutes into the flight, Kennedy's phone buzzed with a text. Dad, land and go straight to the car. We're making this public. She showed Kiana the screen. Think he's serious? Kiana asked. Kennedy nodded. Oh yeah. And when he's serious, the world listens. What neither of them knew was that someone in the terminal had recorded the entire exchange. The video was already uploaded, captioned. These girls got stopped at the gate until their dad made a phone call that changed everything. By the time their plane landed, the clip had 600,000 views and counting. And at Meridian Airlines HQ in San Francisco, an emergency meeting was being called. Because the CEO's daughters had just exposed a truth no PR statement could spin away, and flights, figuratively and literally, were about to stop cold. The black SUV waiting for Kennedy and Kiana outside San Francisco International Airport looked like it had rolled straight off the production line, sleek, tinted, and understated in a way only luxury vehicles could afford to be. Inside sat Christopher Brooks, flanked by his trusted chief of staff, Denise Harris, and driver, Malik, who gave the girls a silent nod as he helped load their luggage. Christopher stepped out the moment he saw them. He wasn't dressed like a billionaire. No tailored suit, no tie. Just dark jeans, a black jacket, and the kind of energy that shifted every room he entered. When Kiana rushed into his arms, he held her longer than usual. Then he turned to Kennedy, who hugged him more cautiously, still rattled from the incident. "You both okay?" he asked, voice calm but tightly coiled. Kennedy nodded, but her voice cracked. "Yeah." "Just angry." "Good," Christopher said, guiding them into the car. "Stay angry, but we use it smart." Once inside, the car pulled away from the curb smoothly. Malik knew better than to speak unless addressed. Denise, seated beside Christopher, passed him a tablet already loaded with alerts, headlines, and a now viral video from the terminal. Christopher didn't have to hit play. He'd watched it 6 times already. He turned the screen toward the girls. "This is everywhere. And it's not just your names in the captions, it's mine." Kiana blinked. "We didn't mean for that to happen. You didn't have to mean it." "That gate agent saw 2 black girls and made a decision," Denise said, her voice clipped. "The internet saw the video and made another." "She didn't know who we were," Kennedy said. "Not until I called you." "That's the point," Christopher replied, eyes fixed ahead. "You shouldn't have to call me to be treated like human beings." A heavy silence settled over the car. "I've already spoken with Meridian's executive team," Denise added. "They're panicking. PR is scrambling to call this a misunderstanding, and they've floated an offer for a private apology behind closed doors." Kiana scoffed. "They want us to make it go away." Christopher's jaw flexed. "Not this time." Denise tapped the tablet again and passed it to Kennedy. "Take a look at the comments under the video." Kennedy scrolled silently, her brows furrowing. "Happens all the time, but this time the girls had a billionaire dad." "Must be nice. What about the kids who don't have a CEO on speed dial? Shout out to the gate agent for making sure we all see how deep the system's rot really goes." "People aren't just mad about what happened to us," Kennedy whispered. "They're mad because it keeps happening." "And they're right," Christopher said. "I've been in meetings with Meridian for months about CoreSite's facial recognition software. I've warned them about bias in their screening algorithms, begged for more testing. They didn't listen. Now they have no choice." "What are you going to do?" Kiana asked. Christopher turned to face them. "No, what are we going to do?" The twins exchanged a look. Denise jumped in. "We have a team drafting a statement, but we want to hear from you first. Your words." "This doesn't have to be corporate. This needs to be real, raw." "Yours." "I don't want to be a spokesperson," Kennedy said quickly. "I just wanted to get on a plane." "That's exactly why your voice matters," Denise replied. "You didn't ask for a platform. It found you." As the SUV merged onto the freeway, the city skyline unfurled before them. San Francisco, glittering and gray under a blanket of fog, looked peaceful. But for Christopher, a war was brewing behind every tower, every boardroom window, every corner office that had pretended not to see until now. Denise's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then looked up, expression darkening. "They leaked it," she said. Christopher leaned in. "What?" "The gate footage, edited. Just the part where security walks over to the girls. No context, no audio. Someone's trying to paint it like protocol." Kiana's face dropped. "Like we did something wrong?" "They're laying groundwork," Denise said, "trying to spin it before we can." Christopher turned to Malik. "Take us to the office. Cancel everything else." "Yes, sir." Kennedy's phone buzzed again. She looked down and frowned. "Mom's been calling a lot." Christopher's tone softened. "Answer her." "She's worried." The call connected with a shaky, "Hello?" on the other end. "Hey, Mom. We're fine." "We're with Dad." Kiana leaned in. "We're okay, just overwhelmed." On speaker, their mother's voice cracked. I saw the video. I don't care who's at fault or what spin they're putting on it. I just want you home safe. Christopher spoke gently but firmly. They are safe, and we're going to make sure this doesn't get buried. There was silence. Then she said, "Just don't let them carry the weight for you." "They're still kids, Chris." "They're more grown than most people in that airport," Christopher said. "But I promise you, we'll protect them." As the call ended, Kennedy looked out the window, her jaw tightening. "I want to speak. Not for Meridian, not for likes. I want to tell them what it felt like." Christopher nodded slowly. "Then that's where we start." That evening, the Brooks family arrived at the Coreside headquarters, a sleek glass structure overlooking the bay. Inside, a crisis team had already assembled: legal advisors, PR strategists, tech analysts. But for the first time, Christopher ignored them all. Instead, he walked his daughters into his private boardroom, cleared the table, and placed 2 chairs front and center. "We record tomorrow morning," he said. "Just the 3 of us. No lights, no makeup, no spin." "And the video?" Kiana asked. "It goes up with the truth. All of it," Christopher said. Denise added, "And when the world sees it, they won't just see 2 black girls stopped at a gate. They'll see the system that made it happen, and who's finally saying enough." As the sun dipped behind the Pacific and city lights blinked awake, the Brooks family sat in quiet determination. There was fear. But beneath it, a fire had caught. Tomorrow the truth would land, and this time no one was getting off easy. The next morning, before the sun had fully breached the San Francisco skyline, the Coreside media team set up a modest recording space inside a quiet, glass-walled corner of the office. No elaborate lighting, no backdrops, just a chair, a table, a camera, and the rising tension of a moment that would soon outgrow them all. Kiana sat first. Her palms were clenched tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Kennedy stood nearby, pacing, chewing her thumbnail in silence. Denise adjusted the camera's framing one last time, then looked toward Christopher, who gave a small nod. "Rolling," Denise said. "Whenever you're ready." Kiana took a breath, eyes flicking toward the lens. "My name is Kiana Brooks. I'm 17. Yesterday my sister and I were denied boarding on a flight we were booked on for reasons they wouldn't explain, until my dad got involved." Her voice was even, but underneath it was tremor, not of fear, of holding something heavy too long. "We had our IDs, our seats were confirmed. We've flown alone before, but none of that mattered, not until they found out who our father was." The footage lasted 3 minutes. In it, Kiana recounted the moment the gate agent's tone shifted, the way the security officer avoided eye contact, how everything changed once the name Christopher Brooks was mentioned. She ended with one line that would become the centerpiece of every media clip that followed. "If we hadn't been his daughters, we wouldn't be on that plane right now, and maybe that's the part that hurts the most." When Kennedy sat down, her tone was different, angrier, sharper. "People say racism today is subtle, that it's not like it used to be. But what happened to us wasn't subtle, it was strategic. It was someone making a snap judgment about who deserves to fly and who doesn't, based on skin color." She paused, swallowing hard. "We've never wanted to be symbols, but I won't be silent just because this time we got lucky." By 9 a.m., the video was edited and published directly to Coreside's social channels with a brief caption, "Their story, in their words." It exploded. Within 2 hours, it had been shared by Ava DuVernay, Gabrielle Union, and multiple Congress members. The clip aired on Good Morning America and appeared on CNN's Breaking Banner. But the twist came not from the media, but from inside the airline. At 11:17 a.m., an anonymous Reddit post titled, "I work for Meridian Airlines. You need to hear this," shot to the front page in under an hour. The author claimed to be a junior developer on the IT team responsible for maintaining Meridian's passenger verification system. And they brought receipts. Internally, the algorithm is known as tier flag. It scores passengers based on multiple data points, including zip code origin, name matching against international watch lists, and travel history. On paper, it sounds neutral. But the weight of these factors heavily skews against black and brown passengers. Screenshots followed, code snippets, memos. Internal flags that listed Kiana and Kennedy's reservation as Level B verify manually. It wasn't a random glitch. It was programmed in. The post ended with, "I've raised concerns. I was told it's above my pay grade." By noon, tier flag was trending globally. Back at Coresite, Christopher Brooks stood in front of a screen, jaw tight, as Denise briefed him and the girls. "This is the window," she said. "This is the moment we can push real change." But Christopher had been in this game too long. He knew what came next. "Has Meridian responded?" he asked. Denise nodded. "They just released a statement. Want me to read it?" He didn't answer, so she continued. Meridian Airlines values the dignity and safety of all passengers. The incident involving the Brooks family is under review. While our systems are designed to protect, we acknowledge the importance of continual improvement. Kiana made a sound like a laugh and a growl combined. "That's it? After all this?" "They're stalling," Christopher muttered, "buying time to see if it dies down." "What if it doesn't?" Kennedy asked. He looked at them. "Then we show them what sustained pressure looks like." Later that afternoon, Christopher convened a virtual roundtable with leaders from other tech firms, civil rights groups, and ethical AI researchers. It was invitation only and entirely off the record. One of the participants was Dr. Miriam Achebe, a renowned AI ethicist who had been warning about algorithmic discrimination for years. "I reviewed the Reddit leak," she said during the call. "It confirms what many of us feared. The tier flag system is biased by design. You can't tweak your way out of that." "What are we talking about here, Miriam?" Christopher asked. "A complete rebuild," she nodded. "That or scrap it. The system was trained on flawed data. You can't trust a compass built from a magnet warped by bias." The call ended with one clear consensus. Pressure must stay public and personal. That evening, Kennedy and Kiana joined their father for dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. No press, no advisors, just the three of them, plates mostly untouched. "You two are handling this better than I expected," Christopher said, breaking the silence. Kennedy looked up. "We had a good teacher," Kiana smirked. "More like a stubborn one." He smiled faintly, then grew serious. "There's something else I need to tell you, and it might get hard." The girls leaned in. "There's a chance this drags Coresite into it. Meridian might accuse us of trying to tank their brand for leverage. The board is already nervous." "You think they'll try to push you out?" Kiana asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "Maybe, but if they do, I'll walk with my name and my integrity intact." The sisters exchanged a glance. "Then we walk with you," Kennedy said. Christopher reached across the table and squeezed both their hands. He had built companies, built fortunes. But in that moment, he realized this was the only legacy that mattered. By midnight, a second whistleblower had come forward. And this time they weren't anonymous. It was Jake Collier, a former regional director at Meridian. He went on record, stating, "I left because I couldn't stomach it anymore. The bias was systemic. Complaints were ignored. The Brooks twins just happened to shine a light bright enough that it couldn't be hidden anymore." The dominoes were falling. Meridian's stock dipped nearly 12% in after-hours trading. Consumer watchdog groups demanded a federal probe. Even the Department of Transportation issued a statement of serious concern. The story had become bigger than the girls, bigger than their dad. It had become about every passenger who'd ever been flagged, searched, and dismissed without cause and without apology. And the nation was listening now. At exactly 8:00 a.m., Christopher Brooks stepped out of his black Tesla and into the chaos waiting at CoreSite's headquarters. News vans lined both sides of the street. Protesters held up hand-painted signs, some in support, some skeptical. Reporters shouted questions across the barricades, their cameras aimed like weapons of truth or distortion. Inside the lobby, Denise met him with a tight nod. 3 major outlets want an exclusive: Washington Post, NBC, and Vice. None, Christopher replied flatly, brushing imaginary lint off his charcoal jacket. This isn't about one media angle. It's about the whole picture. He moved with a controlled pace toward the elevator. The moment the doors closed, the mask slipped a little. "How are the girls?" he asked. Denise smiled. "They're good, tired, but still standing." Still standing didn't begin to describe it. Upstairs, in a private conference room, Kiana and Kennedy were huddled with a woman they'd never met before. Catherine Morales, a civil rights attorney from Oakland who had flown in overnight. Catherine had piercing eyes that missed nothing and a bluntness that cut through pretense like glass. "So let me be honest," she said, placing a thick legal folder on the table. "You two are in a position to either shift the national conversation or become symbols people use and discard. You need to decide now which one it's going to be." Kennedy raised her chin. "We don't want to be anyone's symbol. But we're not backing down either," Kiana added. "Not when we know this isn't just about us." Catherine studied them a beat longer, then gave a small nod of approval. "Good. Because Meridian's legal team is already working behind the scenes to spin this as a coordinated media stunt by your dad. They've hired Bellcroft Lang, the PR firm that handled that data breach scandal at PriceVox. They're trying to discredit us," Kennedy said, her fists curling slightly. Catherine leaned forward. "They'll do more than that. They'll dig into your past, pull up school records, misquote your tweets, try to paint you as entitled, spoiled, reckless. One of you had a detention freshman year, right?" "That's about to be a headline." Kiana's jaw tensed. "I got caught skipping chemistry once. Get ready to see it framed as a history of disciplinary issues," Catherine said dryly. Just then Christopher entered. He took one look at the mood in the room and closed the door softly behind him. "We're fighting a beast," he said. "But I've fought worse, and we're not fighting alone." He tossed a folder onto the table. Inside was the report his own CoreSite engineers had assembled, a technical breakdown of Meridian's tier flag algorithm, corroborated by whistleblower Jake Collier's evidence. It was irrefutable. The algorithm penalized certain demographics, mostly black and brown passengers, for vague indicators like booking from flagged zip codes, high-risk surnames, and incomplete travel history, even when none of those were legitimate red flags. And then came the twist. Inside the same file was an email chain from within Meridian's own executive team, dated just 6 months ago. It included a direct warning from one of their own engineers. "We are flagging 18 to 25-year-old black female passengers at a rate 14 times higher than white males of the same age bracket, with no corresponding security justification." The executive response: "We'll address this in the Q4 review." "No changes before then?" "Jesus," Catherine whispered. Christopher looked at his daughters. "Now you see why I pulled the plug on that partnership months ago." "You knew?" Kennedy asked. a hint of accusation in her voice. "I suspected," he said, "but I didn't have proof, until you two gave them a reason to show their hand." The moment hung heavy. Then Kiana, always the quieter twin, spoke. "Let's make this proof count." Later that day, at a press event held in Coresight's atrium, the twins stood side by side as Christopher introduced them, not as his daughters, but as young citizens demanding accountability. Kiana stepped up to the microphone first. "We were told our experience was an unfortunate error, but we've learned it was policy disguised as protocol, an algorithm that doesn't just reflect bias, it enforces it." Kennedy followed, her voice sharper. "We're not here because we're special. We're here because we got caught in a system that treats people like us as threats before we even speak. The only thing that made our story different was a phone call to our dad, and we don't think justice should require privilege." The audience was silent. Then someone clapped, then another, and then the room erupted. But not everyone was applauding. Across the city, inside a glass-walled office on the 31st floor of Meridian's headquarters, interim CEO Henry Klein watched the press conference with growing discomfort. "This is getting away from us," he muttered, turning toward his legal advisor. "We need to issue something more than a statement." "What? You want to apologize now?" Henry asked, his voice a bitter scoff. "No," the advisor said. "We need to make a sacrifice, meaning someone has to go, a resignation, public." "Dramatic," Henry paused. "Who?" "Patricia Langford, the gate agent." Henry shook his head. "Too low level, won't satisfy public opinion." The advisor stared at him, eyes steely. "Then maybe it's you." At that moment, an assistant burst into the office. "Sir, you need to see this." She turned the monitor toward him. The Department of Transportation had just announced a formal inquiry into Meridian's screening practices. The press release was titled, "Algorithmic Accountability in Aviation." Henry Klein closed his eyes. The dam had broken. Back at Coresight, as media coverage intensified and allies across the tech world pledged support for ethical reform in AI, Kiana and Kennedy watched it all unfold from their father's office. "Do you think this actually changes anything?" Kennedy asked quietly. Kiana looked out the window at the bustling city below. "I don't know, but I know it started something." Christopher, sitting at his desk, swiveled his chair toward them. "Change doesn't come in clean victories," he said. "It comes in pressure, and sometimes that pressure starts with a moment as small as being told you can't board a plane." He looked them both in the eyes. "Just make sure they never forget who dared to push back." The next morning, Meridian's CEO resigned, and it wasn't Patricia Langford. It was Henry Klein. The world was beginning to listen, but the hardest fights were still ahead. By the time the sun dipped behind San Francisco's skyline the next evening, the story had reached every major news network. CNN ran a primetime panel titled "The Algorithm Gap When Tech Fails Black Passengers." Hashtags like #blocked at the gate and "our twin voices" trended across Twitter. The twins' press conference had been clipped, remixed, and turned into reels shared by influencers, educators, and activists alike. Inside Coresight's headquarters, the war room on the 25th floor had turned into a command center. Every wall-mounted screen displayed a different news stream or social feed. A rotating crew of advisors, lawyers, and comms experts moved in and out. But Christopher Brooks wasn't pacing. He was quiet, focused. Jake Collier sat at the head of the long table beside him, wearing a plain button-up and the stiff posture of a man used to being told to sit down and shut up. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't even want to be one. But now that the system he helped expose was under fire, He had become an unwilling figurehead in a growing rebellion. "I've been pulled into 2 HR meetings already," Jake said, hands clasped tightly. "They're trying to claim I stole company property by backing up the logs. Legal's calling it an act of misconduct. You documented discriminatory protocols and saved the evidence before they could wipe it," said Catherine Morales, her voice flat and sharp. "They'll never say it out loud, but that scares the hell out of them." Jake looked up, visibly tired. "I didn't want to make a scene. I saw it happening and I couldn't unsee it." Christopher leaned in, folding his hands together. "You did the right thing. But you need to be prepared, Jake. This fight isn't about one algorithm or one gate agent. It's about the system that built them." Kiana and Kennedy sat nearby, watching him carefully. They weren't in school this week. They weren't planning college tours or thinking about prom anymore. They were in the middle of a national conversation, and the entire country was watching what they'd say next. "We're not going to let them silence Jake," Kennedy said. He stood up when no one else would. "And we're not going to let them throw someone under the bus and act like it fixes everything," Kiana added. Christopher nodded once. "They're going to try to offer a deal," he said. "Something public, something polished, a task force. Scholarships, maybe a co-branded statement about moving forward together." Catherine chuckled dryly. "All sizzle. No stake. But we make it work for us," Christopher said. "We tell them what the terms are, not the other way around." That night, Coresight drafted a letter to Meridian's board of directors. Not a threat, not a demand, but a proposal, a plan for sweeping reform, including a third-party audit of all algorithmic tools in Meridian's system, public release of demographic flagging data over the past 18 months, compensation for impacted passengers, including those beyond the twins, a commitment to collaborate on national standards for ethical AI use in aviation, protections for whistleblowers like Jake Collier, and one final condition. "Meridian doesn't get to control the narrative," Christopher said as he dictated the last paragraph. "The twins get the first interview, with whoever they choose." Meanwhile, across town, Meridian's executive suite was in turmoil. Henry Klein's sudden resignation had left a power vacuum. Interim leadership was now shared between Meredith Callahan, their CFO, and Brandon Lee, their COO. Neither wanted to be the face of the crisis, but they were facing a mounting avalanche: investor anxiety, falling bookings, and now a quietly launched Department of Transportation investigation. "What the hell is ethical AI supposed to mean anyway?" Meredith snapped during an emergency meeting. "How do we measure that? Certify it? Is there a license for guilt?" Brandon leaned back in his chair, eyes on the Coresight proposal now splayed across the conference table. "They're not wrong," he said. "We've known about the algorithm's bias issues for a year." Meredith shot him a sharp look. "You signed off on its deployment. And you ran the financial model that showed cost savings of $18 million a year," Brandon fired back. The room fell into a tense silence. "I'm not trying to blame you," Brandon added, his voice softening. "But we need to acknowledge what happened. We used flawed technology to push through passengers faster. We got called out. And now we either lead the correction or get buried by it." Later that night, after a long string of back and forths, Meridian agreed to the terms. Their final statement would be issued the next morning, but word had already begun to leak via a tweet from a tech insider blog. Sources confirm Meridian Airlines to announce unprecedented AI audit following #Twin Voices controversy. The tweet exploded. By morning, over 20,000 passengers had canceled their upcoming flights with Meridian. Competing airlines were already posting opportunistic promos. "Fly with fairness. Choose Delta." The heat was on. But the real surprise came the next morning. Christopher Brooks was preparing to finalize the agreement when he received a call. "Sir," his assistant said, "you need to see this now. It's about the board meeting." On the screen in front of him, grainy footage began to play. It was a hidden recording, taken inside Meridian's own boardroom. Someone had leaked a clip from an internal discussion held days earlier. In it, one executive could be heard scoffing, "They're just kids. Make it go away with a PR package and a scholarship. No one actually cares about fairness. They care about optics." The video ended with stunned silence on the call. It took Christopher 5 seconds to decide. "We're pulling out." "Wait," Catherine said, sitting up straight. "You mean the deal?" "Cancel it," he said coldly. "They never intended to change. They just wanted to get the heat off their backs." Kiana stood up slowly. "No." "Wait." Christopher turned to her. She was shaking, but not with fear. "With respect, Dad. Don't pull the deal. Kiana. Make them honor it. Every piece, every term, publicly. But don't let them hide behind it." Kennedy rose beside her. "Let the world see that we're the ones holding them accountable, not just punishing them, educating them." It was the first time they'd ever spoken to their father like that. And it stopped him cold. He looked between them, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're sure?" They nodded together. And just like that, a new plan was born. Not retribution, reformation. That afternoon, the twins appeared on 60 Minutes. It was the most watched segment of the year. And that night, a single quote from Kiana Washington went viral. "We weren't looking for attention. We were just trying to board a plane. But if our story helps rewrite the systems that failed us, then maybe that gate wasn't a closed door. It was an open one. For everyone else, still waiting to be seen." The morning after their 60 Minutes interview, Kiana and Kennedy woke up to find themselves all over the internet. News anchors dissected every word they said. Celebrities reposted their speech clips with comments like, "The future is female and fearless." Civil rights groups called for policy changes. But buried beneath the praise and momentum was something else, something quieter, more dangerous. Death threats, emails, DMs. Anonymous comments, some racist, some vile. One even included a photo of their school circled in red. "They're just trolls," Kennedy said, trying to sound unfazed as she sat at the edge of the hotel bed, scrolling through her phone. "Cowards hiding behind fake names." Kiana didn't respond. She was staring out the window of their 23rd floor suite, gripping her phone tight enough to turn her knuckles white. "Dad's not going to like this," she said finally. "Of course he's not," Kennedy muttered. "He's going to lose it." And he did. An hour later, Christopher Brooks burst into the room, phone still in hand, face dark with fury. His security detail had already doubled overnight, but now he was calling in private protection, school security consultations, and a full FBI referral. "I should have never let it go public," he said, pacing. "I should have pulled the deal, shut this whole thing down when I had the chance." "Dad," Kiana said softly, but he didn't stop. "I knew they'd come after us, but I thought the truth would shield you." "You thought wrong," Kennedy snapped, standing, "but that doesn't mean we're going to back down." He turned to her, startled. "You're 17. We're 17 and smart and strong and not going to hide just because the internet hates us for being right." It was a moment of confrontation neither had prepared for, but it had been building. Kiana watched, silent, as the man who had built an empire from nothing now struggled with the one thing he couldn't control, the cost of his children's conviction. "You said it yourself," Kennedy continued. "We weren't just fighting for ourselves. Now that people are listening, we can't go silent. That's exactly what they want." Christopher looked at her. really looked at her, and finally sat down. He rubbed his hands together once, then turned to Kiana. "And you?" he asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But I think maybe that's how I know we're doing something real. Change doesn't happen without risk." Her voice cracked at the end, and for the first time in years, Christopher reached out and pulled her into a hug. Kennedy joined a second later. They sat like that, three pieces of one complicated story, holding on while the world outside shifted around them. That night, the narrative took another unexpected turn. A former Meridian contractor named Kelsey Bennett released a confidential document to a tech ethics watchdog. It detailed internal concerns raised months ago about the algorithm's racial predictive bias. She had written it. HR had ignored it. Her contract wasn't renewed. Within an hour, the report hit Reddit, then Twitter, then cable news. Terms like algorithmic profiling and systemic flagging protocols entered the mainstream conversation. Meridian released a statement calling the report unauthorized and incomplete, but it was too late. The truth had a pulse now, and it was racing. The following morning, Corsight was invited to testify at a congressional hearing. The House Subcommittee on Technology and Civil Rights had taken interest. Fast. Christopher hesitated. He hated Washington, hated the theater of it, the grandstanding, the lack of results. But Kennedy and Kiana didn't hesitate. "We'll go," they said together. The committee room was full, live-streamed, every seat packed. Members of Congress on both sides of the aisle leaned in as the twins were introduced. Kennedy went first. She didn't bring notes. "I'm not a tech expert. I'm not a politician. I'm a 17-year-old girl who was told my valid boarding pass might be fraudulent, who was pulled aside while white passengers walked past us without a second glance, and who was only allowed to board once my father's name came up, because that's when they realized we mattered." Gasps rippled through the room. Kiana followed. "But this isn't about us. It's about the fact that if we hadn't had that privilege, if our dad wasn't the CEO of a major tech firm, we'd be just another case no one noticed. That's the problem. That's the system." Their testimony made headlines, again. But as they exited the building, flanked by security, a man in a tan jacket slipped through the press line and shoved a flash drive into Christopher's hand. "What is this?" his bodyguard asked, moving to block the man, but he was already gone. Back at the hotel, they opened the files. It was worse than they thought. The flash drive contained an unreleased internal video from a Meridian team training session 2 years ago. In it, a lead engineer explained how the algorithm was designed to flag edge case behavior, especially where historical trends show increased variance. A coded phrase later clarified to mean non-white travel patterns. In other words, the bias wasn't just tolerated, it was built in. "Do you know what this means?" Christopher asked, sitting heavily. Kennedy stared at the screen. "They knew," she whispered. "They always knew. They didn't just fail to fix it," Kiana added. "They built it this way." It was the smoking gun, and now they had to decide how to use it. "Do we go public?" Kennedy asked. "Blow it all up?" Christopher hesitated. "They'll come after us harder," he said. "This won't just be trolls. This could be lawsuits, counterclaims, smear campaigns." "But if we don't do it," Kiana said, "then it all gets buried, and nothing changes." The room was quiet. Finally, Christopher leaned forward. "We don't leak it," he said. "Not yet." "Then what do we do?" Kennedy asked. He looked at them both. "We give them one last chance to do the right thing, and if they don't, then we make sure the whole world sees what they really are." And just like that, the stakes were higher. The line had been drawn. They weren't just trying to fix a broken process anymore. They were about to expose a company that had built its entire security model on a lie. The night before the Meridian Shareholders Emergency Summit, silence sat heavy over the Brooks suite. Christopher stood at the edge of the penthouse balcony, phone pressed to his ear as the skyline of San Francisco blinked in cool indifference. Inside, the girls sat at the dining table, their laptops glowing with draft documents, press statements, and talking points that blurred together. "I know what's on that flash drive," Christopher said into the phone, his voice low and razor-sharp. "I also know your board has seen it." On the other end, Meredith Callahan, acting CEO of Meridian Airlines, exhaled slowly. "Christopher, if you release that video, we both know what happens next. Lawsuits, reputational damage. I don't need a lecture on consequences, Meredith. I need accountability. You have until 10 a.m. tomorrow to commit." Publicly, full implementation of the CoreSite equity standards, not just promises, action. Or we go wide with everything. She hesitated, her voice suddenly brittle. "You're going to blow up the entire partnership." He stared out at the lights beyond the bay, his jaw tight. "No," he said, "you already did." He hung up. Back inside, Kennedy was rewriting their statement for the fourth time. Kiana scrolled through a timeline they had built. Dates of incidents, public complaints, private emails, now layered with the damning footage from the Meridian training session. "You think they'll cave?" Kennedy asked, her voice brittle from too little sleep and too much reality. "They won't cave," Kiana said without looking up. "They'll spin. They'll sacrifice someone. They'll dangle a public apology and hope that's enough." Christopher walked in and leaned on the back of one of their chairs. "But we have something they don't," he said. "People." "They don't have to care about people," Kennedy said bitterly. "They have stock prices." "Not anymore," he replied. "Tomorrow, we give the shareholders a choice, ethics or exposure." The next morning, the Brooks family arrived at Meridian's gleaming tower 30 minutes before the vote. The media swarmed the curb, cameras clicking furiously, reporters shouting questions over one another. Christopher didn't stop, but the girls did. Kennedy stepped to the microphones, flanked by Kiana. "We're not here to tear anything down," she said clearly. "We're here because systems should protect people, not profile them. If you think that's too much to ask, maybe it's the system that's broken." Inside, the air was cold with tension. The shareholder meeting had been moved to a larger auditorium due to public interest. Glass walls overlooked the city below. Rows of men and women in tailored suits murmured as the Brooks family entered, flanked by security. Brandon Lee, Meridian's COO, opened the meeting with the stiffness of someone trying to keep a dam from cracking. "Before we proceed to the vote, we have a guest who's requested to speak. Mr. Christopher Brooks." The room quieted. Christopher walked to the podium slowly, glancing once at his daughters before facing the crowd. "You all know what happened at Gate 41B, but that moment wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system working exactly as designed." He paused, letting that settle. "What you don't know," he continued, "is that Meridian's internal teams knew about the disparities in the algorithm for over a year. We now have video evidence, data, internal emails, not accidents, decisions." A low murmur broke out. "I'm not here to bury Meridian," he said, "but I will not let my daughters or any other person of color be treated like statistical noise. You have a choice. You can lead the reform or become the headline." Then he stepped aside, and Kennedy and Kiana took his place. They didn't raise their voices, they didn't cry, but what they did was dismantle every corporate excuse ever made in the face of discrimination. Kennedy spoke of every moment of subtle invalidation, of being followed in stores, of being asked, "Are you sure this is your seat?" on planes. She looked directly at the shareholders and said, "You've invested in a brand, but we're asking you to invest in people." Kiana took the microphone with trembling fingers but a firm voice. She showed the training video. No commentary, no voiceover, just the clip. And when it ended, the room was so quiet you could hear someone breathe in 3 rows back. "Now you've seen it," she said. "What you do next tells us who you are." The board vote commenced. The final count: approval of the full CoreSite partnership and public apology, 71% in favor. Mandatory third-party audit of all security systems, 65%. Permanent adoption of ethical AI protocols, 74%. When the final tallies were displayed on screen, Christopher let out a slow breath. "We did it," Kennedy whispered. "No," Kiana said, reaching for her hand. "We started it." As they walked out of the building, journalists followed with renewed intensity. But the girls didn't stop for interviews this time. They didn't need to. By noon, the video clip had aired on every major news outlet. By 4 p.m., the Department of Justice announced an official inquiry into algorithmic bias in security protocols nationwide. By sundown, Meridian's value had stabilized, then ticked up. Because justice, it turns out, isn't just right. It's profitable when you do it right. Back at the suite, as Christopher sank into a chair, Kennedy pulled out her phone. An email had come in. Subject line, TEDx Youth Inquiry. Would you be interested in telling your story? She smiled, then turned the phone to her sister. You ready to go bigger? Kiana looked at the message, then back at her. Let's go change the world. 3 weeks later, the world looked different. The viral video of the Meridian training session had racked up over 42 million views. Major networks ran back-to-back coverage on algorithmic discrimination. Civil rights groups pushed for congressional hearings. But for Kennedy and Kiana Brooks, it wasn't the views or headlines that changed their world. It was the messages. The flood of emails and DMs, the strangers who approached them in coffee shops, airports, bookstores, not with pity, but with thanks. A grandmother in Atlanta messaged them saying her grandson, who had been pulled aside for random checks every time he flew, finally felt seen. A woman in Detroit wrote that after watching their testimony, her company initiated its own AI ethics audit. Teachers played their video in classrooms. Debate teams used it in tournaments. They had sparked something they could no longer contain and no longer wanted to. Inside Terra Sky Hall, a sleek venue overlooking the San Francisco Bay, the atmosphere buzzed with a quiet reverence. It was the launch of the Ethical AI Fellowship, a joint initiative between Terra Corps and Meridian Airlines, named in honor of Kennedy and Kiana. This time, the spotlight wasn't on scandal or outrage. It was on what came next. Christopher Brooks sat front row, no longer just the CEO who pulled the plug on a corporate giant's arrogance, but the father of 2 girls who had changed the conversation. He wore a deep navy suit, crisp white shirt, and that proud, reserved smile he saved only for them. As Kiana stepped up to the podium first, she paused. The room hushed. When they told us we could name the fellowship, she began, her voice clear, we thought about calling it something big, something epic, but that's not how change happens. Not really. Change starts with the moment you choose to speak up, even if your voice shakes. Even if you think no one's listening, she looked to her sister, especially then. Kennedy took her place beside her, eyes locking with hers briefly before turning to the crowd. We were just trying to get on a plane, she said simply. We didn't plan for any of this. We didn't want a movement. But when you're pushed to the edge and the only thing you have left is your truth, sometimes that's enough. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Sometimes the truth opens doors that have been shut for too long. Applause rose, genuine, thunderous, not the polite kind that fills time, but the kind that fills rooms with something heavier than noise, respect. After the ceremony, back in the green room, Caroline, their mom, pulled them both into a hug that lasted just a few seconds longer than usual. She looked at Christopher, and for the first time in a long time there was no tension, only shared pride. "You didn't just survive that gate," Caroline whispered to them. "You turned it into something powerful." Later that night, they walked the Embarcadero as the city hummed around them. No cameras. No press. Just the sound of waves slapping concrete and a cable car rattling in the distance. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Kennedy asked, hands in her pockets. Kiana shook her head slowly. "Not like this." "You scared it'll fade?" Kennedy asked. "A little," she admitted. "I don't want it to be one of those stories that goes viral, gets headlines, then disappears." Kennedy stopped walking, facing her. "It won't, because we won't disappear. Promise?" "Promise." Back at the hotel, Christopher was still in the suite, feet propped on the coffee table, tie loosened. When they walked in, he didn't speak right away, just looked at them the way only a dad can, with the kind of quiet gratitude that doesn't need to be said aloud. He reached into his coat pocket and handed them each a card. They were black, thick, embossed in silver. Kennedy read hers aloud. Kennedy Brooks, Senior Fellow for Ethical Innovation. Kiana smiled and read hers. Kiana Brooks, Director of Community Design and Inclusion. TerraCore? Kennedy asked, surprised. "I told the board," Christopher said, "if we're building systems for the future, I want the future in the room." They didn't speak for a moment. Then Kiana said, "Dad, thank you." "But you know this doesn't change what we want to do, right?" He smiled, leaning forward. "I'm counting on it." They sat together that night, quiet, not out of things to say, but finally at peace with letting the silence speak for them. Elsewhere on social media, the video of their speech continued to trend. But now comments began with words like inspired, grateful, moved. There were still trolls, always would be. But the movement had found its roots, and the people behind it had found their voice. In the final scene of the short docuseries being produced by an independent filmmaker, a voiceover from Kennedy plays as images of protests, boardrooms, classrooms, and airport terminals flash across the screen. "They tried to block us at the gate. Instead, we opened a door, not just for ourselves. For everyone who's ever been told you don't belong. We do, and we're not asking anymore." The screen fades to black. White letters appear. Change doesn't wait for permission. It boards anyway. As a final note to the audience, if this story moved you, share it. Let others hear what happened, because your voice adds power to ours. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of who we are at our best and what we must confront at our worst. Where were you when the gate was closed? And what will you do to help open the next one? Thank you for watching.